All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Business Pavilion. Our session is getting underway here. We have an exciting panel that is kicking off around empowering consumers in sustainable living. So this is, I will admit, this is the session I've been looking forward to the most the whole week. So panelists, don't let me down. I think we're going to be awesome. But we're really excited about the conversation that we're going to have, because I think it's increasingly recognized as an important topic, given the significant portion of global emissions that are attributable to the decisions that consumers make in their daily living, whether it's what to buy, how to furnish, how to dress, what to eat, how to move around, how to travel. So increasingly important to talk about this. And as we are gathered here in COP28, a very timely topic too. So we actually have an outstanding panel that's joining. They will introduce themselves in a minute, but as you'll hear, they represent very unique angles on each of this. We have a mix of companies and an organization, and they bring to this topic of enabling consumers in sustainable living. They bring research into the science of human behavior. They bring information about sustainable living choices and impacts, inspiration through storytelling and content, products for a more sustainable life with affordability, as well as solutions for empowering customers. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. And I've asked the panelists to each self-introduce, but with only 3 sentences. They're going to do name and title. They're going to do my role is ... and my company or my organization's connection to sustainable living is ... So why don't we go ahead with Karen?
Thank you. My name is Karen Flug. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer of Inca Group. Inca Group is IKEA's largest retailer. So hopefully you all know who IKEA is. Thank you.
My name is Brett Jinks, and I'm the CEO of a nonprofit called RARE. My role is changemaker, and we're working on empowering millions of people to be part of the climate action needed.
Hi, Emma Stewart. I lead sustainability for a small studio called Netflix, and we reach 250 or so million households in 190 countries, and seek to entertain all of them in their wonderful variety and diversity. And with that comes what we're hearing, an increasing interest in sustainability topics.
Hi, my name is Friedrich. I'm a co-founder and managing director of a company called Ecolytic. Excuse my voice. Somehow the warm weather here and the air conditioning has stolen it. We have a climate engagement platform designed for banks and financial institutions to engage consumers around the world to live a more sustainable life.
Terrific. So you can hear the different perspectives that we have, and what a terrific, outstanding group of leaders and leading organizations and companies. So I'm buttering you up to really nail it today. Let's start with the fundamental and foundational question of why. Why is this an important topic to talk about? I alluded to it in the introduction, but I would love to hear thoughts and perspectives around why is this something that each of you focus on. We'll move it around. Let's start with Brett.
Great. We're sitting here at COP with 100,000 people, all talking about various aspects of technology, finance, the role of MDBs, the role of NGOs, the role of civil society. Ultimately, the question is, what are we going to do to empower 8 billion people to be part of this change? There's a whole lot of people that aren't here. And when you survey the world, what you find is that people are very interested in doing something, but most of them don't know what to do. Most people feel, therefore, unempowered, demotivated, at a loss, concerned, anxious. And we have a huge opportunity to change that, but there aren't very many people working on that problem.
Yeah,
Could I connect that? Because I would like to build on that too as well, because we've just recently conducted a survey together with GlobeScan of 33,000 customers in 30 of the IKEA markets, and we see a very similar pattern. 2/3 of them are greatly worried and concerned about both climate change, but also about rising inequality as well. So I think it's important to remember the human dimension of the climate crisis and so on. And 2/3 of them expect businesses and governments to act connect and to help them. And the biggest barrier to stop them doing something more themselves is the perceived cost. So for us at IKEA, that is where we really feel we can help, because we really want affordability and sustainability to go hand in hand. It shouldn't be that customers have to pay more to live more sustainably. So we really want to focus on that with the work that we do.
Yeah, that's great. I want to come back later to that topic of affordability, accessibility. Emma, how about for you and Netflix?
Similarly, the research that we've seen, third-party research from Pew, Ipsos Mori, Globescan, Yale University, Rare.org, all orients and centers around this 2/3 number. 2/3 of consumers are alarmed, concerned, and want to see brands working alongside them to take action. And this was confirmed for us in our own analytics when we looked back across the year of 2022. In a few weeks' time, we're going to pull the stat for 2023, and we fully anticipate it will go up. But in 2022 alone, we saw that 165 million households chose to watch at least one film or television show about sustainability topics. So this is premise level treatment of sustainability topics, either challenges or solutions. That's a pretty sizable number. And, we're here to please audiences. So for us, that's kind of a guiding star as to what they're indicating to us they want to see more of.
Yeah, very cool. I think for us, when we started out thinking about building a business model on how to engage as many people around the world as possible on this very important topic, we counterintuitively didn't go towards the consumer directly. And I think it's because in the end, something like 2/3 or even more people around the world are interested in learning about sustainability. But if you then go along and ask them again, would you be willing to change something? That number drops drastically. And if you add towards that question, would you be willing to pay for that change? It drops even further. So the moment in time that you go out to market and you're only addressing that 20% of people who are actually willing to pay for that change, you have eliminated 80% or something like that, which is so critical to actually engaging these millions of people, which is why we said going through banks and financial institutions is going to be the way to go, because everyone nowadays, or at least most of the people, use digital banking as a mean, and having that connected towards sustainability is going to allow them to experience sustainability as part of their daily banking experience. Every time they spend money, they will see the effects of that. And that's how we designed the whole process to actually achieve it at a certain scale.
I know a few of you have alluded to where consumers are, right? The recent research that you've done with Globescan. We also have partnered together and others with Globescan on another study around the world of where consumers are. And certainly, Brett, your organization does a lot of research into the space. So let's go a little bit further into that of, do consumers aspire to live more sustainably? Obviously consumers are not a monolith. And so and I think we often talk about consumers as like, well, consumers this, consumers that. Let's talk a little bit more about what are we seeing? Maybe Brett, I can turn to you, and then we'll go to Friedrich. Where do you see consumers on this journey of living more sustainably?
So we've done a deep dive over the last couple of years in the United States under the theory that if we could actually bring along Americans, we could probably bring along the rest of the world, since we probably have one of the biggest challenges in my home country. What we found is that, like Emma said, and given the Tony Lasarowitz's research at Yale program on climate communications, we all know there's a lot of people in the United States who are interested in addressing climate change. The question becomes, how do we turn that into actual demand for solutions? And once you start really thinking about the behavioral science behind why people change, if you just take it for a minute out of our usual orientation towards consumer demand, you begin to understand that people really change for three reasons. We change, I can save you a couple of PhDs in behavioral science simply by saying there's three things you really need to know about how to make change. People change when they see other people change. People change when they think other people expect them to change. And people change especially and very quickly when they think the rate of change is increasing, and it's almost subconscious. If we all sell smoke in this room, we wouldn't run until Emma led us out. If Emma left and I followed, we would all run out of the room. So we follow other people instinctively, and that's where both the problem, there aren't that many examples of people doing the right thing, adopting the right new behaviors or products, and that's also the opportunity we have before us.
And maybe to add to what Brett just said, and I fully agree, I think making this information tangible and relatable is so critical, because we hear a lot of things which are very, very abstract, but it doesn't naturally transform to who we are and how we think, but it has to be as personal as possible to actually make me want to make those changes, which is why it's so important to actually have it at the point of time in consumption or wherever you actually live, that you have these things that affect you directly and not are an abstract, maybe a statistic or something in the world.
Great. We've been joined by our final panelist. Let's catch you up and have you do the introduction that we went down the line with. Name and title, your role, this is 3 sentences, your role, and your company's connection to sustainable living.
Super. Well, speaking of change, I have always been somebody who really likes to be on time, and you will never change that fact. So I'm really sorry for being late and quite warm. But to introduce myself, Antonia Gavel, I work with Google as a director in the global sustainability team. And your question, if you could repeat it again, was?
And the connection of Google to sustainable living.
Okay, the connection of Google to sustainable living, I think, to say it briefly, I mean, Google, we really think of our role as very much an information and an innovation company. So on one hand, I would say from the perspective of information, which was here, it's what kind of information can we actually provide to enable sustainable living choices? And I can give a few examples. Tell me if I should do that now or not. No, I'll give one example.
We'll head to that a little bit later.
Yeah, okay.
Go ahead.
I'll give one quick example. Basically, things like Google Maps, we have a feature called eco-friendly routing, which, if it's not already the fastest route to where you're trying to go, will show you a fuel-efficient route, which helps you make a decision as to which route you'd like to take. And it's these kinds of tools that are embedded in existing systems that are providing more information. And that specific feature has already enabled 2.4 million gigatons of CO2 emission reductions, and which is basically the equivalent of taking 500,000 cars off the road in a year. So information is key, and obviously innovation is the other piece, and I'm happy to kind of go into more detail about that.
Well, I'm going to stay with you on this because we were just talking about was where are consumers currently and what is driving behavior. You see a lot of search terms. You see a lot of searches, and I know because I was on the website this morning checking it out, the sustainable living section, and it was talking about how searches for sustainable living topics seem to be at an all-time high. Do you want to say a little bit more about what you see for consumers' interest through the world of search?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So part of the way that we make decisions about what kinds of information we can provide is looking at what people are asking for, like what are people searching for, and as you said, through Google Trends, you can actually go and see what types of search questions people are posing. And so terms like thrifting or sustainable fashion are terms that have seen an increase in search, reaching an all-time high in 2022. And so that kind of just gives us all insight, I think everybody insight into what types of information people are looking for, to be able to then say, okay, what are the types of solutions that we can bring together to help enable, consumers, everybody, citizens, find the sustainable choices, any choices that they're really looking for as well.
At IKEA, where do you see your consumers, and do you see variation by geography? Are you seeing variation by other demographics on this journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think the survey that we conducted, we definitely saw that if you live in a market where climate change is in the here and now and is really apparent, Southern Europe or parts of Asia, we could see up to over 95, 96% of people concerned. And we also see that concern to, the worry, intention to action gap that we speak about. So what will help them actually decide to purchase? I mentioned the affordability aspect. For us, that is absolutely key, and it is extremely important. Many people don't realize how big a food supplier we are. We're 600 million people who come and eat our meals every year at IKEA. And what we've done is make the plant-based meal alternative cheaper than the meat equivalent. So that nudging, that behavioral change to really help people. We're aiming for 50% plant-based meals by 2025. And some markets were already there. Some markets were in their 30s and 40s. Even quite meat-eating countries are really making that switch. So I think it's essential. And then from a geographical point of view, we are also really exploring what we do with secondhand and enabling customers to bring back furniture. We started it with a Green Friday campaign a few years ago, and now it's year-round. Customers can bring back, they get a voucher that they can spend at any time on anything that they would like to purchase later. And then we then sell it on to other customers to give products a second life. We also do repairs and so on as well. And that helps it to be even more affordable. And then, secondhand in Europe might have a different sort of cultural meaning compared to in other parts of the world. So we really have to hone in on what's the sweet spot for the individuals in the different markets where we operate.
How about Emma, coming to you? Do you see where the Netflix subscribers around the world, are you seeing variation with those? Because you mentioned the sheer number of households who have been accessing the sustainability content. Are you seeing that? Is that even across the world, or do you see different spots where it's more engaging, more active users than others?
We don't watch people's behavior perhaps as much as they assume we do. So what we do know is that volume, that absolute level of interest. And we also know, I guess if that's the demand side of the equation, we also know that on the supply side of the equation, so the communities who write stories for a living, our creative partners, they are increasingly coming to us asking for research and fact-checking and essentially support services to infuse sustainability themes into their craft. And that is true across all genres. You might expect that in the documentary and unscripted realm, like reality television, but we're also seeing it across rom-coms and thrillers and murder mysteries. In fact, speaking of upcycling, a reality television show that's very popular in many countries called Next in Fashion, the contender, I was going to say candidate, but I have elections on the mind. The contender who was looking to win the whole thing was an upcycler. That's how he described his fashion sensibility. And one of the episodes was dedicated to every single one of the fashion designers had to learn how to upcycle if they wanted to stay on the show. And at the end of the whole season, he actually walked away with the top prize. So talking about that happened organically. It was just a level of interest from the creators, from the fashion designers themselves, from the showrunners. And those sorts of things can have real ripple effects in terms of normalizing something that maybe in the past has been seen as a sacrifice.
It's good to know about that. You're not tracking, because I have not caught up on my great British baking show finale yet, because I flew here that night, and so.
Also,
but you might know that. But
all plant-based, Great British Baking Show. All plant-based.
We need that. And they have done an episode, actually, that was all plant-based. It was very good. Frida, let's talk about like the theory of change at Ecolytic. Do consumers have enough information right now? Do they have decision? Do they even understand what the footprint of their spend is? Because you're interestingly situated in the financial institutions that you serve, because you see a cross spend. So you're seeing all sorts of different spend in different categories and all sorts of different consumption. So what's your theory of change for consumers?
Maybe let's start with like the geographical part first. So I think what we just heard is very, very true for us as well. So if we partner up with banks in different parts of the world, we see very, very different ways how people spend. And it is our duty and task to basically tailor the content to make it relevant, to keep it relevant for them. So maybe if we speak about Hong Kong, you're going to have many people in a very dense area where you're not going to come around and say, by the way, have you thought about switching towards a heat pump, right? Because these people cannot insert a heat pump into their apartment. Or have you thought about inserting maybe PV on your roof? Well, that's not going to happen. But there are other means. So I think it's very, very important, again, to like make sure that the content that you provide is relevant and is tailored towards these regions. We see very, very different spendings throughout the different customer segments as well. So we have some segments which are tailored towards the youth part, where of course the people are not going to consume the same kind of information as if they're older people, right? So in the end, having that message relate towards these people is absolutely critical, and then making sure it becomes relevant and stays relevant. Yeah.
And Tony, at Google, a lot of the efforts that you do in the travel space and shopping and energy is about access to information, about how to find an eco-efficient route in Google Maps, as you mentioned, how to find information about travel. Do you want to say a little bit more about what you're doing? Because the sessions is about how are businesses enabling sustainable behavior. So let's hear more about Google.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think, it starts maybe with a few things. So one is, where are the areas of impact? Where are the areas of greatest impact that we see as a community there is the ability to decarbonize? And two of the areas, at least, that we've identified, which probably anybody who looks at climate analysis knows, is that energy and transport are two of those sectors. And so then you break it down. You say, okay, well, what are the things that will actually enable that transition? And as I said before, what are things that people are looking for? So electric vehicles is another example of search that has increased. And what we've started to do, as I mentioned, is put more information into the hands of consumers. So the questions that you might ask yourself when you're making a major purchase is, how much is it going to cost? Yes, there's kind of like the purchase cost, but obviously what's the ROI in terms of payback in fuel savings? So trying to put that information alongside, here is the vehicle, here is the cost. What is the ROI in terms of fuel savings and emission savings over time? Provides an additional ingredient of information to help consumers understand, in that case, the cost savings over the medium term, really, in that sense as well. And so kind of creating those types of easy to find sets of data sets is another way that we do this. And, as an economist, there's the left brain, right brain side of the thinking. I tend to kind of very much look at the numbers and look at the analytics. But I think just to pick up on the point earlier, there's a piece of research that I just love from Yale, the Center for Climate Communications, which is it's also about what your neighbors are doing, right? So you can provide the data, the analytics, the information, and of course that will help people like me make that decision. But also really understanding that community dynamic and understanding what others in the community are doing is certainly an interesting insight that I've seen come out of some of that Yale research. And I think just something for us to think about as we look at these types of transitions as well.
This is where, Emma, I think Netflix should rethink, so that I say, hey, every one of your neighbors on the block is watching Down to Earth with Zac Efron. Don't you want to watch it too? So,
maybe just to add to one thing, I think on your point, is exactly the reason why we feel that transactional data, in our case, is such a powerful tool. So if you take transactional data, it basically opens up how people behave and how they consume and what the effects are. So taking that and also putting it into relationship to who are the peers, who are the communities that also emit these emissions, and how can you compare to them, and how can you understand how you compare to them to give you very, very, let's say, strong insights on what you can actually do to change as well. So if you, for example, drive a very old car, and we know that you go to the gas station and pay, I don't know, $300 a month for gasoline, the bank can come around the corner and say, by the way, have you thought about switching towards electric car? Right? You can save X amount of tons of CO2 per year, and by the way, here's a car loan as well to actually make that transition happen. So I think making it, again, very, very relatable is absolutely critical.
Go ahead, please.
I love that we're talking about the individual behaviors and the various opportunities for each of our organizations to actually either nudge or provide a financial incentive or somehow enable change. It's really important when you pull back to think about what are the biggest priority behaviors? What are the behaviors that are most meaningful? And those are contextual. If you live in Colombia, most of your energy to heat your home or cool your home will come from hydroelectric power. So it's already pretty good energy. If you live in the United States, it's probably coming from coal, or in parts of Europe, you want to be thinking a lot, unless you have photovoltaics on your rooftop solar. So there's a different solution mix on the consumer side within each country. In the United States, we've done a lot of research at RARE over the last couple of years, and we've identified a handful of behaviors that matter way more than all the others. We've mentioned them, but I want to just make two quick points about this list. One is adopt a plant-rich diet. It's an enormous change. Yeah. Thank you, Google and IKEA in your cafeterias for promoting plant-rich. Buy carbon offsets, which are highly complicated and fraught with information and misinformation, but really important from the standpoint of investing in nature as a solution, assuming they're good offsets. Your energy source. How are you heating and cooling your home? So if you can have community solar, if you can have solar panels on your rooftop, food waste followed by electric vehicles, and then reducing your flights. The question then becomes, if that's the United States and that's a list of 5 or 6 behaviors, what would it take for us, given that they're all at the beginning of that S adoption curve, they're all hovering right around 4, 5, 6, 7%. How do we get to the other 95% of consumers? And that's just the United States on that set of behaviors. What we have found, there's a great piece in the Washington Post yesterday that articulates a body of research that says, after a meta-analysis of all the research out there basically on consumer behavior related to environment and climate, information gives you about a 3.5% lift. Economic incentives, about a 12.2% lift. This is a gross generalization over millions of data points. The most powerful lever for change at 14.5% is social comparison. And by that we mean, if you see your neighbors put up solar panels, if you see your neighbors driving an electric vehicle, if you see your neighboring farmer planting trees in the pasture or composting, you are emulating the behavior. There is almost no one pushing that concept, and yet it might be the biggest opportunity for behavior change in climate today.
Well, it's good. It's a good segue because I wanted to do a double click on home energy because as your research shows, it is one of the areas. And I'm going to do it from 2. Google does a lot to help with awareness for consumers around how viable is solar as a solution. So I want to hear about that piece of it, and then how IKEA is helping consumers with that piece.
Yeah, I mean, energy is a really important topic for us, like it is for many people. And of course, we've been in various panels this week on that. And then, I mean, for us, what we do is, like many businesses here as well, of course, is focus on our own operations and investments as well. So we've somehow ended up with Inca Investments becoming a medium-sized utility company. So we have committed up to 7.5 billion euros into solar and wind up to 2030, which is fantastic. And then as part of our overall energy drive, it is in fact an ambition of ours to offer clean energy solutions to all customers in our markets by 2025. It is tricky, different legislation, and also, as you pointed out, many of the consumers of IKEA live in apartment blocks, are renting, so they aren't able to put in heat pumps or solar panels. But we're really trying to find a way to make it accessible and affordable for customers to switch to that clean energy.
I believe you're doing battery storage as well.
Yes, yeah, and we're exploring heat pumps. We're also exploring an actual subscription service as well in Sweden to test and try that to see if we could then roll it out to other markets too.
So say I'm a homeowner, how do I find out through Google how viable solar is as an option for my house?
Yeah, I mean, so you mentioned that Google does indeed have a tool that provides information about the viability of solar for homes, indeed, and it comes back to exactly that. Is on one hand, where using some kind of satellites are the opportunities in this space. How does that sort of translate into then my ability to invest in solar panels on a household? And equally, I think I come back also to that point about the fact that if we can kind of create a movement around communities to transition, to your point about what is that opportunity, then that will certainly have a great impact. But indeed, there is a tool, a solution that provides visibility for the viability of solar on roofs, coming back to that home energy being an incredibly important space, but also inside the homes in terms of heating and cooling is also a major area of energy consumption. And there we equally have a number of solutions also to make it easy and fun. And Doug, you gave the example of using Nest, the Nest thermostat in your home, where it uses kind of technology to enable users in your own home to optimize your kind of heating system and gives you a green leaf. You told me that you were very proud of your green leaf when you're able to kind of bring that the CO2 emissions from that energy use down. So it's making it fun. I think on one hand it's making it easy, but also using kind of technology to enable that reduction as well. So various types of approaches. I think we can look at home energy as well in this context.
It's funny you mention it, because not only did we talk about that last night, this morning I woke up to my monthly email that I get about my green leaves, and I've reached I'm at 870 toward my next 1,000 milestone, and it sounded like that actually there is actually going to be some even tangible rewards, that maybe discounts or promotions, that it sounded like in that email. So that's great. I think another one, because we talked about make it social, so make it that you see the neighbors, but also how do we even normalize it? How do we make, like EVs, for example, how do we make that? I know Netflix, you want to talk about what you're doing in the electric vehicle space?
Sure. Well, we set targets to decarbonize our company a number of years ago, and then also we took responsibility for any emission we couldn't reduce in a given year. We would invest in nature to retain that carbon for us as we work to hit our 2030 target of halving our emissions. To do that, we have to electrify a lot of production vehicles. And as we were doing that, we realized, hang on, these things are not that hard to find. And so we partnered up with a small auto manufacturer called GM. And we said, well, how about we commit ourselves to include at least one EV in every production, effectively giving them the stage that they deserve, was how we thought about it. And so we did that for a year. We worked with the line producers and the unit production managers and also the writers to the degree that maybe this vehicle becomes what's called a hero vehicle, meaning if you watch Family Switch that came out this week, really fun, kind of sappy Christmas comedy. In it, the lead character, she drives an electric vehicle, and there's quite a few shots that make it very clear it's an electric vehicle. She pulls up, there's the charger, they have a little dance in front of the charger, etc. So we found that actually there was tons of receptivity from the productions because there was a recognition that this is now just becoming normal. And so shouldn't we be accurately reflecting that on screen? We then had the benefit of, thanks to GM, taking arguably the biggest stage in the advertising world for a good 60 seconds at the Super Bowl, and placed an ad with the indefatigable Will Ferrell, who has done a couple really funny EV ads in his time. And we had the stars of Bridgerton and Stranger Things and you name it, kind of iconic Netflix shows. And we just had fun with it. So we essentially said, look, we're putting more EVs in shows, but not Bridgerton, because it turns out they weren't around. And not Stranger Things, because that was the 80s, and they really weren't available. So we decided to bring some levity to a subject that all too often feels really heavy and perhaps even intimidating to the typical consumer.
Yeah.
You know, I think we will know we have won.
To jump in on this.
Everybody wants to talk about Netflix. We will know we have won the game when there's a 1912 period piece with Thomas Edison and Henry Ford driving around in the first electric vehicle. That would be great behavior placement. I just want to say I love what you just described, because what's so exciting about the potential for putting behaviors on screen is that we tend to model those characters with whom we identify. The only way a story works, the only reason we love stories is we identify with a character, one of the characters, sometimes all of the characters. We follow them, we empathize with them. That's what draws us to those stories. If the getaway car is an electric vehicle and the combustion engine is the one that breaks down and they get arrested, we have a really good outcome for nature. But what's even more powerful is if we can get those those stories and those elements on screen and then create a little echo chamber around them so that other people start pointing out those moments, noticing them, amplifying them. I think that's one of the really big opportunities for normalization that all of your companies have in store.
Yeah, I think just to add on the e-vehicles and the movement towards that, we're doing many things in our organisation as well, similar to, as Emma mentioned, sort of really electrifying our own fleet. We've seen a huge increase since the pandemic, which has continued with people ordering online deliveries. So for us, we really want to make sure that we're driving towards, excuse the pun, driving towards zero emission deliveries by 2025 in all of our markets, 100%. And that is tough in different markets. But we're testing things like cargo bikes in many of the cities. We've got electrified boats coming down the Seine into central Paris, which also reduces air pollution as well as having less trucks on the road to deliver into the heart of Paris for where customers want IKEA products. We've even got electrified rickshaws, not just in India, but in Sydney, Australia as well. So lots of fun things. And then for the customers themselves, it's about making sure that in all the stores that have a car park, that we have e-vehicle charging available for customers, so that when they come and have a look round for hopefully a few hours and have something to eat as well, then they can charge up their cars too.
While you have the microphone up, let's talk meatballs.
Yes, plant balls.
Yes, that's exactly. I want to talk about that because you mentioned, and you're exactly right. I think very few people know the size of the food business that you all are in, one of the largest groceries essentially in the world.
Yeah.
I would say, and the classic, what you're known for is there's that
the
meatball.
I know is so iconic and has been around obviously for many, many years. Originally with Ingvar Kamprad, the founder of our organisation, 80 years ago, the business was formed, and he really wanted to make sure that people who came for a good day out, often out of town, to go to an IKEA store, could have something to eat with their family as well. And Sweden is famous for meatballs, but for many years our food team have been saying, how do we really nudge towards the plant-based food? We could see that is one of the biggest drivers of impactful change for individuals. Also what Johan Rockström says, when you say, what can I do as one individual to make a difference? It is to switch to the plant-based diet. So we started with what are called sort of veggie balls, which then look obviously like a vegetarian dish. You can see the bits of carrot and peas and corn in them and so on, and they're pretty tasty, but they don't look like a meatball. But now, a few years ago, we introduced the plant ball, which actually looks and tastes and feels like, you get that umami flavor that feels like a meatball. We now have a plant dog as well, which is extremely popular. So, yeah, lots of fun.
We're not supposed to eat a dog.
No, instead of the hot dog.
Yes, instead of eating
the
dog,
hot
you gotta eat a
plant
plant.
dog, maybe we should call it, to clarify.
Good, let's get that on the record.
Yeah, exactly.
Another area you mentioned, you said one of the behaviors was fly less. I think we might argue maybe fly differently, fly smarter. Google's done a lot in the travel space around access to information about the footprint of air travel. I don't know how many people know that Google's a big source of booking of travel. Do you want to say a little bit around what Google's doing to make that information more available and accessible?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think along a similar trend, it is about providing that information to individuals. As you know, on sort of Google Flights, you look for your flights, you can kind of see all the traditionally options, time, pricing, etc. But in addition, now what you can see is the emissions that are associated with different trips, and also various options in terms of reducing those emissions between different flight options. You actually see that information now as a consumer, and kind of inputting to this is very much a collaborative effort as well. So the model, it's called the travel impact model, that has been designed is kind of coming together through a group of experts across the industry, but also academia, to really make sure that the data and the analysis that goes into this is as updated and accurate as possible, to continuously feed that, and then bringing that into collaborative efforts to make that information also available in other contexts as well. So again, it starts with information, but also in mind is how do you partner across the ecosystem to kind of continually update and bring accuracy to those models and to that insight, but then partner with other stakeholders to begin to scale this information through as many channels as possible as well.
So I'm hearing across the panel make information available, make it aware, make it inspiring and engaging through content and storytelling, remove frictions in different ways. Should we insert positive frictions should we be making the lesser sustainable choice harder? Do you guys have perspectives on that? Any views across the panel?
I think research shows that positive reinforcement is definitely the way to go. So we always encourage through positive aspects of saying, have you thought about this? People in your community have done this to actually achieve the following goals. And thereby, I think there's a much higher impact to actually achieve these targets. So therefore, we're a big fan of positive reinforcement. I think the stick hasn't come out yet. I think at some point one could consider the stick, maybe for certain user groups, but it would require a little bit more of a segmentation.
But can I just jump in there? I think more from my side, I think, and listening this morning, the C40 Cities panel around health and air pollution and so on. So I think one incentive is nudging with making the pricing lower with the plant-based meals, but the other is really, if you hit home about you and your family's health and well-being as an aspect, not just because it's the right thing to do for the planet or for nature, then when it means something to individuals, they're much more likely to act. But similar reply, we're also aiming at the carrot, the nice vegetarian carrot, rather than the stick. Making people feel guilty about not living sustainably doesn't work. So I think we really need to encourage and promote and do it with optimism and action at the heart of it.
I'd love to give an example of what Karen's describing. We have a show called Secrets of the Blue Zones, which chronicles 20 years of research by a fellow called Dan Butner, who's really quite an encyclopedia about centenarians. So these are people who live to be 100 and are healthy and happy and lucid and just delightful. And he has studied these areas of the world that have come to be known as blue zones, because it turns out that they are concentrations of people who quite easily live to be 100. Some of them are still cowboys in Costa Rica and playing pickleball outside of Los Angeles and walking up hills as steep as my own in San Francisco in Sardinia. And what he found through this 20 years of research was that eating a plant-rich diet and relying in particular on forms of mobility that were not combustion-based, so relying on your own 2 feet or something with wheels that you pedal, were two of the common features across all of the blue zones. You'll be happy to know that wine was also one of the common features. So that's the opposite of sacrifice, right? You eat delicious food, manage to get yourself around the world, and drink lots of wine with friends were some of these secrets. In contrast, a film like Don't Look Up, which almost 2 years ago now literally ushered people into the streets yelling, just look up, just look up. And I still hear from colleagues that they have seen in common parlance the phrase, oh, it's a don't look up moment. It's made its way into kind of the cultural vernacular. That was maybe less of a positive message, but what it did was unleashed, I think, a lot of pent-up frustration from those who felt there wasn't sufficient action. And the friends of mine in the scientific community said they finally felt seen on screen because they had Jennifer Lawrence and Leonardo DiCaprio encapsulating their battles of misinformation. So a negative story can also have a positive intent.
That's great. Brett, what does your research show about the carrots and sticks approach?
We did a lot of research years ago and built on research that was done in Stanford in the 70s that compared pride and shame. And for years, we've run campaigns that we call pride campaigns all over the global South, building indigenous and local pride in nature as a way to enable change. Pride outclasses shame 2-to-1 easily all the time. So positivity is really rewarding, obviously. One of the big opportunities that gives us, if you connect positivity with norming, is just the idea that everyone's doing it. If you consider that everything we've been talking about here, downloading Google, when I got my solar panels, I used Google literally was built into another company. it said, "Is this your rooftop?" I said, "Oh my God, how did you find my rooftop?" Yes, click. And in 1 second, I had bids, thanks to you guys, for solar panels. So that reduced the friction. But there was no way I was going to buy those solar panels, even though I had all that information, without asking 5 or 6 friends, without looking around my neighborhood, subconsciously even, and seeing that other people were doing it. So one of the big opportunities that links this all together, and I don't want to just be repeating myself, but I do feel like I'm going to be the barker the next year with a box in the park, just screaming to anybody who will listen. We are missing a trick. And that trick is, think about it right now. Would you post on your social media, which might be seen as bragging, that you drive an electric vehicle, that you have solar panels on your roof, that you've decided not to fly to COP, that you are buying carbon offsets? You'd be fearful of demonstrating privilege somehow. You'd be fearful of not knowing exactly where the solar panels were manufactured. There'd be recrimination possibilities from all of your high school friends on Facebook or your children's friends on Instagram. Why is that? Because we're still at 4 or 5 or 6 or 7%, and 95% of the world is not yet there. So how do we create the sense that everyone's doing it? And we're not lying to people, because it is going to happen. We can see the projections, we can see the curve, but we cannot take it for granted. We've done a lot of research in the last 2 months that has shown us that electric vehicle adoption, having just started to escalate in the United States, is now a little uncertain. We're not certain about that curve. And there's a variety of reasons potentially why, but what we were taking for granted, because the economic incentives are there, because the policies are in place, charging infrastructure is getting better, but unless we all start patting each other on the back for the little things that we're doing, and unless we find ways to establish, green, whatever the green flag is that you give him once a month, the green leaf, that's what we need to do socially, and we need to find a way to mechanize and scale that.
We all need to act like Norwegians, where they've got no problem buying electric cars. But that sense of normalizing, and I think, but I also, back to Emma's point about the, Don't Look Up film, and it was just when I started in my role as CSO at Inca as well, and everyone, you've got to watch this, and everyone was watching it. But there is something between that optimism, courage, hope, action, that sense of agency everyone wants to feel, but that collective agency of creating a movement together. But also, when you think of how we acted as a society in the pandemic, when it really, really mattered to us. I was living in the UK at the time. We had a very strict lockdown. We all acted. We all came together and we did the right thing. So it is possible, and that came from a very negative angle, of course, but it's how do we create that tipping point and movement together so that it is normal and everybody feels they're getting the pat on the back for doing it and so on.
I'm so glad you said that word, because that's exactly my next question is there a sustainable living movement? Should there be a sustainable living movement? What does that look like? I mean, we have companies, we have organizations, we have NGOs, we have governments who are saying the different things, but are we working too much in silos? Should we be working more collaboratively? Some great initiatives out there. The Google and Visa and a number of others are part of the Travelist initiative, where we're trying to get harmonization of travel data so that you go to one site, you go to another site, and you get more consistent. So you're not like, oh, it's 4 leaves. We're big on leaves today. 4 leaves with this hotel. No, it's 2 stars over here. So there's work like that. Is there a movement? Friedrich, you got your mic on.
Maybe for us, less a movement, but we rather want to see it like as a commodity, so that when you actually consume, it's not, I have to check out what the effect actually was for the environment, but rather it's something which is automatically there. So again, back to the point, why banks? Well, everyone uses a banking app. So if you can see that money flows out and emissions go up, that's going to be something very, very natural. And it shouldn't be, oh, I'm surprised, but I'm very much conscious of what just happened. And so therefore, again, less a movement. I would say it just has to become more and more commodity, to your point, that people reinforce that behavior through communities, through their families and their friends, people they trust.
Yes. I think sorry, you go. Sorry.
I mean, I think to the question and building on that, there's always going to be different dimensions to tackling climate change. So on one hand, it's what are the things that we can do that people actually don't even know or see necessarily. So, for example, I mentioned eco-friendly routing, and it's built into an existing system. So there's a space of it. I have to talk a little bit about AI and technology, but the tools that we now have at our disposal in terms of data, analysis of data, being able to sort of provide at scale information is something that I think has an incredible benefit. So how do we make it as easy and frictionless as possible to get this information, to be able to make the choices in the cases where they are looking for those sustainable choices. And as you were saying, it has to be part of a collective effort if we're going to, find these types of information and solutions at scale as well, and that will come through all of the collaborative efforts that I think many of you are all involved in. So it's a bit of a both and, is sort of leverage what we have, optimize as much as we can with existing resources and infrastructure through some of these technologies, and collaborate to actually bring scale to some of the solutions as well.
No, I was just going to say about the trust factor. I think that's incredibly essential, that everybody really trusts each other in order to create that movement. But we have to make it easy for customers. It has to be a given, what you say in Swedish, a hygiene factor. It has to be that we don't even question, so that when we look in 20, 30 years, when our children and grandchildren are saying, oh, remember back in the 2020s when they still used the internal combustion engine or they still burnt fossil fuels, what were they thinking, because it seems so abnormal in the future. So it has to become easy, just built in, so you don't have to think twice about it.
There's also this internal contradiction. I think it's hard for corporations to talk about movements because the job is to sell a product, not necessarily be out in front, openly, avowedly changing behavior or influencing, society or cultural norms. And yet, one of the biggest challenges we have in our own community among NGOs and civil society trying to address climate change is this concern that any focus on individual lifestyle, any focus on personal efficacy or individual behavior is actually anathema, that it's the legacy of a fossil fuel funded 20-year-long campaign like recycling to make us all feel like we're responsible, the oil companies aren't. And I just want to continue to encourage all of us to understand the yes and solution, which is we need systemic change. We need the policies and the economics that will reduce the friction so that the change is easy. But we also need it to be okay, especially those early adopters and the most climate interested, for our peers to be doing the right thing. And that is actually something that's been holding us back pretty significantly.
Sorry.
Just on the question of, is there a consumer movement? From our vantage point, what we see is the change in creators' choices. And they write largely from their lived experience, from what they know. They're mirroring society. And so if you look at that mirror, I mentioned Don't Look Up, which was the top 2 Netflix film in the company's history and hit the top 10 in 90 different countries, which is largely unheard of for a comedy, because comedy often doesn't travel across cultures. The number 1 animated film ever in Netflix history is Sea Beast, which I highly recommend, and is essentially a tale of a little girl advocating for vilified marine creatures who are being killed off by a greedy royal family, which sounds a lot like the shark fin trade and other such stories. The number 1 film in Netflix history is Red Notice, where you have The Rock jump in an electric vehicle in order to chase the bad guys. And there's a wonderful moment where he realizes it's electric and then he hits the pedal and he just zooms off. And then the number 2 television series in Netflix history right now is Wednesday, in which the famous dance that took off on social media, in the series, she actually describes it as a dance about climate change, but in a fun way. And so creators are just starting to represent their lived experience, their concerns, their anxieties, their conversations, and also their solutions into some of the most fictionalized worlds imaginable. And that's when I think you really start to, when you look in that mirror, realize there's a change afoot.
And I just wanted to, I was trying to think of example, I said project ourselves 20 years in the future, but certainly where I live in Europe and also even in parts of India and Hong Kong and so on, no more single-use plastic bags. People are so used to now taking their own bags to go shopping, and they don't think twice about it. When it first happened, people were up in arms. They're on, this will never take on, and I keep forgetting it when I go out. And now it's, it's there for people to use. And then for us, the switch to make LED lighting affordable. We didn't invent LED lighting at IKEA, but we made it affordable for the many. And now in many markets, you can't even buy an old-fashioned tungsten light. It's a switch that in the more developed markets, it's a given, and we are still helping to transform those markets where it still needs to happen.
And kudos to you all for probably the leading voice to talk about the affordability topic, that we can't have sustainable living be, to use the U.S. market for 1 second, just the coasts that can do this. We have to democratize access. We have to make it affordable so it isn't just the elites and the affluent that can live the sustainable lives and have equitable access. Yeah.
I just, sorry, briefly, wanted to pick up the point about it's the both and in terms of the system. And I think you just gave a great example of how IKEA has played that catalytic role to shift an entire system, which is ultimately then where the mega impacts will come. And I think and so we need to balance. I think this is an important part to balance in terms of this conversation of, yes, through information, through kind of culture, through all of these means, we can enable consumers to be able to make these choices. And I think as in our case, companies in this system, we also have a role to play in actually transforming the systems maybe that people don't necessarily see, right? So for example, in terms of climate change, we have a goal to to kind of supply all of our energy from carbon-free sources by 2030, which is a 24/7 goal. So sourcing carbon-free energy localized on grids by 2030 for all of our data centers and offices. And that requires getting into quite a lot of partnerships in detail, looking at policy, looking at renewable energy transition. So it's just important, I think, to say that we need to do both of these things. Yes, information for consumers, and engage in the wider system that will enable a mass-scale transformation as well to really hit the climate targets that we need to.
And I'm really glad, Brett, that you raised this topic, because it was like, I think last year, the IPCC report for the first time talked about the sustainable living topic. And I know some were like, does it sound like we're going down that path? And I think that message that it's both and, it's not in place of, it's in addition to the large scale actions needed by government and policymakers and large enterprises and others.
Can I just add on a product point of view as well, is we've not talked about it much here on the circular topic, but in order for customers, it's not just about them changing behaviors, but 50% of IKEA's carbon footprint is tied up in our products. So if we do not switch to renewable or recycled materials, and we've got that ambition to do that by 2030 for all products, we will not hit our carbon goals. We won't be in line with the Paris Agreement and the 1.5 target. So we absolutely have it in our best interest, but also it then helps customers to lower their carbon footprint if they're buying a circular product or a renewable material product.
Yeah, the re-commerce world is one of our Visa's favorite topics now, and we're doing a lot of work in that space around the rental model, the return, the refill, the redistribute, all the great R's out there. So thank you for mentioning it. And Tony, you have the microphone. We're going to go down the line. Or keep the microphone. You have it. We're going to go down the line with, I think, as many panels do, end on the positive note. So what is, one or two sentences that gives you hope, you feel positive about in this topic area of empowering consumers around sustainable living?
I think I mentioned I do have great hope and excitement in the potential of AI to help really accelerate some of the very near-term solutions that we know are available, and do it in a way that actually is quite easy for consumers and also businesses. So that's sort of one area amongst many, but I'll leave it at that.
Maybe two parts. I think one thing that gives me hope is that generally, last year, I think there was $70 billion spent in venture funding towards sustainable business models. So I think finally also this industry has woken up actually towards enabling many people around the world to actually achieve these things, build great business models, and really enhance this topic going forward. And I think number two is, I mean, we're sitting here and speaking about what we can actually do and change. Maybe we can go away at some point to make a Netflix documentary about how Google has implemented a transaction-based footprinting mechanism, and we can speak about it, making it very much publicly available.
For me, it's watching the numbers tick up on our Sustainability Stories collection. So this is a collection of film and television and now games. Netflix Games is a new business. We already have 3 sustainability video games and over 220 film and television titles that at the premise level deal with environmental topics and across every genre, not just documentaries, but of course including documentaries. And what's amazing is to just watch that number organically grow. Because this is a topic du jour. This is something that captures people's hearts. They're anxious about it. They want to understand it better, and they want to join with their neighbors to take action.
What gives me hope is our experience working in 60 nations in the global south over the last 30 years on behavior change. And what that's given us is a view of just how similar we all are across the globe. We are all primates. We are all very social. And 2 things. We always resist change, but we are way better at change than we are at resisting it over time.
That's a bit of a mind-bending one to follow on from. Thank you. I think, +1 on what everybody else has said. It was brilliant to hear everyone's point of view. But for me, I think it is that the solutions exist. We often get caught up in, what we haven't got time and what do we need to do and so on. But the solutions exist today. And I'm busy making sure that our finance team are my best friends because I really think when sustainability, finance and business come together to talk the same language on common ground and not make it separate topics here and there, we can then be the driver and for large brands to be a voice for good. I think that will then inspire customers to make the change too.
Right. Thank you. As moderator, we take the final word before we thank the panel for a moment of the moderator privilege. As many of you know, I announced recently, after 15 years at Visa, that I'm going to be departing at the end of the month for new chapters. This is probably my last public appearance wearing a Visa hat. I'm trying not to get choked up. So thank you. I just want to thank the entire Visa global team for 15 years of getting the honor and privilege to being in a role where we're driving inclusive and sustainable impact in the world of commerce and consumption, and all the partners, including I think everybody on this stage, for the work together. So thank you all. But more importantly, let's thank the panel both for today and for all the work that each of them is doing.
Well done, guys. Thank you. Well, great moderation. Thank you. Thanks.